and Joint Chiefs of Staff Chairman General Henry Shelton. Live coverage here on C-SPAN. Now we'll look at Serbian news coverage of NATO airstrikes on Yugoslavia from government-controlled Radio Television Serbia in Belgrade. This portion of the news was recorded today at 1:30 p.m. Eastern Time and translated here at C-SPAN in Washington, D.C. It's about 35 minutes.
You're watching primetime news of Radio Television Serbia. Respected viewers, the Supreme Command ordered that part of the units of the Army and the police begin to return from Kosovo and Metohija and announced that after the agreement with United Nations and the end of the external danger, it will be possible to reduce the forces to peacetime conditions. Here is the report. Given the fact that the actions in Kosovo against the so-called KLA have finished, the Supreme Command ordered that part of the armed and police forces begin to return from Kosovo. This decree is in effect as of May 9th at 10 p.m. Secondly, it has been decided that upon reaching the agreement with the UN about the peace mission of that organization in Kosovo, that will also terminate the danger for the territorial integrity of Yugoslavia, it will be possible to reduce the armed and police forces in Kosovo on peacetime levels corresponding to the time before the aggression. Thirdly, with good security of the borders that will prevent offenses from terrorist groups from Albania and Macedonia, the peacetime level of armed forces and police forces will, according to our estimates, guarantee the safety of people and their property on the entire territory of Kosovo and Metohija. Individual terrorist attacks, smaller groups of terrorists of KLA that cannot be excluded can be taken care of by regular forces. President of the Republic Slobodan Milosevic received the special envoy of the Chinese government, Deputy Foreign Minister of China Wang Guozhang, and the Chinese ambassador to Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, Pan Jianlin. The high Chinese officials conveyed to President Milosevic the regards of the Chinese President Jiang Zemin and the great solidarity of the Chinese people and support for the people of Yugoslavia and their leadership in their determined fight against the NATO aggressors. The high Chinese official thanked President Milosevic, Yugoslav leadership, and the people as a whole for their concern and great assistance for the suffering Chinese civilians after the bombing of their embassy in Belgrade. Stressing that the aggression against Yugoslavia is an aggression against all of the peace-loving people in the world, President Milosevic said that the just fight of the Yugoslavs for their freedom is also a strong warning against any dictate of power. The bombing of the Chinese embassy is one more a tragic testimonial to the madness of the NATO aggressor that has been killing our people for several weeks. Yugoslavia and China are sincere friends that share same opinions about freedom, integrity, and open cooperation among states and nations. The developed and rich relations among our nations are a proof of this striving that gives the best support for the common progress of our people and the progress of the world as a whole. President Milosevic asked the high officials from China to convey his message of deepest condolences, as well as the belief that the Yugoslav people will forever remember the Chinese people who lost their lives in an honorable mission of strengthening the relations between our two countries. The president also sent his regards to President Jiang Zemin and also wished to China continued success in its development. Minister Živadin Jovanovic was also present at the meeting. The President of the Republic, Slobodan Milosevic, also received today Yasushi Akashi, distinguished Japanese diplomat and former Deputy Secretary General of the UN and Special Envoy for Yugoslavia, who is currently on a private visit to Yugoslavia. President Milosevic expressed his satisfaction for this meeting with the Japanese diplomat, remembered fondly for his impartiality and striving for an equitable solution of the Balkan problems. Akashi expressed his deep regrets for the fact that our people are exposed to a bombardment that causes so much destruction and human suffering. He also expressed his conviction that a political solution is necessary and possible, just as it is necessary to resolve the humanitarian problems and to go for further reconstruction and development of Yugoslavia and the region as a whole. President Milosevic stressed that Yugoslavia, as an attacked country, has insisted from the beginning of the NATO aggression from UN to take steps towards the end of this military action and return to political means, to assume its assigned role and respect the UN Charter in order to lead to a peaceful and equitable solution. The meeting was also attended by Federal Minister Gvozdenovic-Puzovic. From London, we have the first official reaction of the world at announcement of our Supreme Commander that part of the forces of Yugoslav military and police withdraw from Kosovo. The British media have immediately reported the news that the Supreme Command has ordered a partial withdrawal of its troops because of the end of their actions against the Albanian terrorists. This was the leading news in Britain, and it was received as an unexpected turning point in Kosovo crisis. British analysts still do not know how this will reflect upon the crisis and the NATO campaign against Yugoslavia, but the media do feel that the decision of the Supreme Command could be a crucial step towards a peaceful resolution. The Yugoslav ambassador to the UN, Vladislav Jovanovic, spoke to Sky News and rejected any doubts in terms of the implementation of this order. The order is extremely clear, said Ambassador Jovanovic. The presidents of Russia and China, for the first time today, jointly demanded an immediate end of the aggression against Yugoslavia. Even the president of Italy, one of the aggressor countries, asked for an end of the bombing, which has gone out of control over the last few days, leading to predominant assault on civilian rather than military targets. Chinese throughout the world continue to protest against the American and NATO deed in Yugoslavia. Presidents of China and Russia, Jiang Zemin and Boris Yeltsin, demanded today an immediate end of the US-led NATO bombing as a prerequisite for a peaceful solution. Yeltsin called Jiang on a special phone line to express his indignation regarding the barbaric NATO attack on the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, stated Xinhua agency. Yeltsin condemned the bombing of a sovereign state like Yugoslavia that ignores the authority of the UN. He called NATO for an immediate end of the bombing and a return to a political dialogue on Kosovo. Only this will lead to a possible political solution, said Yeltsin, according to the Xinhua agency. According to the Chinese president, the end of the NATO bombing is a prerequisite for the resolution of the Kosovo crisis. If the bombing continues, we cannot consider any plan at the UN Security Council. Any plan, he stressed further, ought to be acceptable to the Yugoslav state. Jiang also stressed that the US-led NATO attack on a sovereign state, an arrogant policy of cannonballs. This is a very dangerous trend that needs to be watched closely by the international community. China and Russia, as two permanent members of the Security Council at the UN, have a major role towards the support of justice and protection of peace. Condemning the NATO attack on the Chinese embassy, Yeltsin noted that Russia and China have an identical position on this question. Jiang noted that this attack, led by America, is a barbaric act and gross violation of Chinese sovereignty, a historic precedent in terms of history of diplomacy. NATO, led by the US, has to assume all responsibilities, stressed the Chinese president. He stressed that Russia and China have a common ground regarding international questions, including Kosovo, suggested that they remain in close consultation with one another. China decided today to suspend its military contacts with the US at the highest levels. This is the first measure after the US-NATO bombing of the Chinese embassy. Beijing also decided to postpone the scheduled consultation meetings with Washington regarding arms proliferation and control and promotion of international security. They also decided to suspend its dialogue with the US regarding human rights. In Beijing and other cities, today there are continued protests of students and other citizens against the bombing of the Chinese embassy. Stop the bombing, protect the peace, appeal thousands of students in front of the gates of the US embassy protected by reinforced police forces. Today, China made 4 strong demands to the US and NATO. The Chinese Foreign Minister Tang Jiasuang Aside from the official apology to China, its people and the families of the victims of this attack, demanded that NATO and the USA conduct a full, thorough investigation of the attack on the Chinese embassy in Belgrade, to publicly report the results of that investigation and punish severely those responsible for it. Chinese demands were issued as a strongly worded formal note of protest. China does not accept the explanation thus far and the regrets that have been expressed and which have led throughout China to an outpour of protests. China also demands an immediate end of the military actions in Kosovo and a political solution to be sought. The special Russian envoy for Yugoslavia, Viktor Chernomyrdin, made an emergency trip to Beijing to discuss with the Chinese leadership the situation in Yugoslavia after the latest bombing of civilian targets in Belgrade, including the Chinese embassy. The decision on this meeting was made this morning by the Russian President Yeltsin and the President of China, Jiang Zemin, after a telephone conversation in which they discussed in detail the latest developments in Yugoslavia and the new tensions in the US-China relations. It is expected that Viktor Chernomyrdin in Beijing will be received by the Chinese President and the Prime Minister, as well as other high officials. The discussions should begin tomorrow, which obviously changes the route of diplomatic contacts that Chernomyrdin had scheduled earlier. But Russia will continue the diplomatic mission on behalf of Yugoslavia, stated the spokesman of the Russian Foreign Ministry, in anticipation of the arrival of the Deputy Secretary of State of the U.S. Thrope Talbot to Moscow, the French Foreign Minister Vedrin, and the French President Chirac. According to the Russian Foreign Minister, Russia is awaiting the results of the investigation of the bombing of the Chinese embassy, which Rahmanin, the spokesperson, calls a tragic incident. They also expressed concern for the personnel of the Russian embassy in Belgrade, currently 150 strong. According to Rahmanin, the Ministry of Foreign Affairs continues all necessary measures in order to continue the normal operations of the Russian embassy in Belgrade. The latest turn in the US-China relations, which have fallen to their lowest level since the establishment of formal diplomatic relations 2 decades ago, causes a growing tension among Clinton's closest associates. It seems that only after an escalation of protests around China, the aggressor has realized that the bombing of the Chinese embassy is not a simple accident without ramifications for the continued actions of the aggressor. China's strong reactions have deeply concerned Washington, leading over the weekend, as the press says here, to a state of emergency as a confirmation that China is serious and won't tolerate or be quiet before the arrogance of NATO and the US. We hear from Beijing that they're terminating the consultation with US in many important areas such as arms control, strategic security and human rights. America has clearly found itself in a much worse position than predicted by the Washington strategists and advocates of the military aggression. The mass protests around China and the official reactions of the government confirmed the unity of the Chinese leadership and its people, causing an especially strong headache to the Americans. The cooling of the relations with Beijing to the lowest point in the past 2 decades opens the question for Americans. How can Americans minimize the consequences of the bombing of the Chinese embassy, which showed to the entire world the outcome of the bully policy of the US? The greatest headache is now how to explain this tension, which obviously went beyond all their expectations, and how will it reflect upon the process of the UN Security Council, where serious discussion is expected. US understands now that they have lesser space for manipulation or attempts to use political dialogue and the umbrella of the UN in order to push their ultimatums, which they didn't manage to accomplish by bombing and aggression of a sovereign country. On the other hand, as New York Times says today, there is a greater area now for political solution, which, as American media say, will have to take into consideration a lot more seriously all other parties who demand an immediate end of the bombardment and an equitable resolution of the crisis. The bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade has led to mass protests in Chinese but also in other cities throughout Asia. Chinese students demonstrated in front of embassies and consulates of US in Singapore, Tokyo, Tel Aviv, and many other cities. They carried posters against NATO and the bombardment of Yugoslavia and against U.S. imperialism. One Chinese student said, "We are not happy with this apology. This cannot be over with an apology." In the protests in Taipei, they spoke, "Down with American imperialism." State Department suspended all official visits of American officials to Beijing, asking all American citizens to postpone their travel to China. The American embassy is still closed, as the State Department confirms. Diplomatic representatives of NATO in China are still under siege by thousands of demonstrators. Presidents of France, Jacques Chirac, and President of the U.S., Clinton, spoke on the phone regarding the ministerial of the G8 countries as a positive step towards a political resolution. As reported in Paris, Chirac and Clinton stressed the essential role of Russia. In Paris, Jacques Chirac received the UN envoy for the Balkans, Carl Bildt, in order to discuss the Kosovo crisis. Bildt, after the meeting, said that the ministerial of the G8 countries is very important for the continued work on the principles regarding the political solution of the Kosovo crisis. It is necessary that bombardment ends immediately so as to begin discussions about peace, stated the Italian President Luigi Scalfaro after his meeting with the Macedonian President Kiro Gligorov. Italian government insists on finding the curve of peace. We are very concerned that the bombardment of Yugoslavia has come out of the military framework going towards civilian targets. We respect our NATO allies, said the president, but this also includes possibility of different opinions and different advice. Italy is for solidarity, but not for a single command over the alliance by a single state. Europe must express its unified political will, which is impossible in this war against Yugoslavia. He added that all people, including those of the Balkans, have to be in one unified Europe. We were dreaming of a unified Europe for 50 years, concluded the Italian president, and we hope that there will be a day when the political unity of Europe will coincide with its geographic unity. The revolt, rage, and strong anti-American stance of the citizens of Macedonia is expressed through almost daily attacks on the soldiers and vehicles of the notorious alliance. In downtown Skopje, a US-marked vehicle was set on fire, while near the military hospital close to the UNPRODEP headquarters they set on fire a cargo container. Last night near Kumanovo, there was another armed attack on the French soldiers from NATO. This is the third one in the last few days. Close to their base, hand grenades were thrown, and they were followed by a few more explosions. The spokesperson of the alliance in Skopje, Eric Muñoz, confirmed this information and stated that there are no injured people, but warned that soldiers will have the right to respond to these provocations and attacks in the future. NATO propaganda claims that after the embassy attack in Belgrade, nothing spectacular took place. While the condemnation of the brutal action flows from all directions, especially from China, who demands the responsibility for this evil act against civilians and an end of the brutal aggression. The spokesperson of NATO in Brussels, Jamie Shea, said that he understands China's anger, but that this incident will not affect the political attempt to resolve the Kosovo crisis. Unlike earlier appearances, spokesperson Jamie Shea mentioned a lot more the word diplomacy, insisting on diplomatic solutions for the Kosovo crisis. The Secretary General of the Alliance will have to travel to Bonn today to explain to Chancellor Schröder the bombing of the Chinese embassy, which has led to a cancellation of the German-China summit scheduled for the end of this week. Western media report that the attack on the Chinese embassy with most advanced American bomber flights, B-2 Spirit, included 3 laser-guided missiles from 5,000 meters of height. The head of the British diplomacy, Robin Cook, is clearly under duress today by the numerous questions from the lower house of the parliament regarding his explanation on the Kosovo crisis. The head of the Conservative Party sharply criticized Cook for this last of the many mistakes of NATO, the bombing of the Chinese embassy. Michael Howard, foreign relations representative of the Conservatives, attacked NATO for its incompetence in this attack because every map of Belgrade has clearly marked embassy sites, including Chinese embassy. He asked if NATO has a list of goals that have to be avoided, and of course all embassies should be on that list. According to the words of the Conservatives, NATO has failed in planning and implementation of its military plans, and after 7 weeks, it's very far from the alleged humanitarian goals proclaimed by Tony Blair at the beginning. Howard found confirmation, especially in the statement of General Neumann, that NATO has shown incompetence. Labour Party representative Tony Benn said that the government of Britain has lost contact with reality. Further criticism came from many other parliamentarians. This also confirms the writing of Daily Telegraph today that the reservations about the military action are spreading even among those who are its most vocal supporters. The analysts in London say that the arrogance of NATO have caused catastrophic consequences for the international community so far. The bombing of the Chinese embassy shows the internal relations in NATO. Embassy was an American target, not a NATO target. No matter how much they try to conceal, it is clear that not a single other NATO member, except for Britain, knew that this was a goal. This was done by American forces who are not part of the command structure of NATO. It seems that NATO is simply an instrument of America. Now they're trying to find somebody who will be responsible. And in this manipulation, regardless of its naivete, there is further bigger problem. Is it possible that 18 NATO countries are in service of one intelligence agency with a well-known history of violence and lies? Everybody knows that the Chinese embassy was targeted deliberately for the internal needs of the U.S. domestic policy. Does NATO have any future? The new European Commissioner, Romano Prodi, clearly stated that EU must have its own armed forces. America is indeed maybe the most powerful country in the world, but as the analysts in London say, America is not the only country in the world. This is how we also see the German request for an immediate investigation regarding the Chinese embassy. The deliberate attack of the Chinese embassy is a strong blow to the government of Chancellor Schröder in Germany. The Minister of the Environment Treaty said that he was shocked by the growing civilian casualties in this dirty war waged by NATO. The bombing of the Chinese embassy was not a mistake, but a sabotage orchestrated by the U.S., stated Eric Schmidt-Embon, director of a research center from Waldheim, specialist for intelligence services. Such mistakes are impossible. The clearest explanation is that the U.S. wanted to undermine the declaration of the ministers of G8 countries regarding the principles of the political solution for Kosovo, because they don't want Russia's and UN's involvement in this. Pope John Paul II received today the leader of the Democratic Alliance of Kosovo, Dr. Ibrahim Rugova, who expressed a desire to speak to the Supreme Head of the Catholic Church prior to his visit to Paris and some other states in Europe. Pope John Paul II said that the insistence of Dr. Rugova will contribute to the peace, stated Joachim Navarro, the spokesperson for Vatican. Afterwards, Rugova said that it is essential to invest all efforts and create conditions for mutual confidence so that all refugees can return to Kosovo regarding of their ethnicity. In front of the International Tribunal in The Hague, the highest court of the international community, today we have to debate the demand of Yugoslavia for an immediate end of the aggression and for a restitution for all of the damages inflicted by NATO. Yugoslavia accused the NATO member countries that by attacking one of the founding members of the UN, a country that's not aggressor, they have violated all norms of international conduct, including the Geneva Convention of '49. The indictment demanding a restitution for the losses against Yugoslavia has been pressed against the US, Great Britain, France, Germany, Italy, the Netherlands, Canada, Spain, Belgium, and Portugal. In the explanation, they say that the assault on Yugoslavia was done illegally without the consent of the UN Security Council. It is anticipated that this extraordinary hearing session at the court in Hague will last for at least 2 days. The decision of the 15-member committee are binding and without right to appeal. If the countries indicted do not agree, the International Court can transfer the entire case to the jurisdiction of the UN Security Council. In Belgrade, the Federal Minister Goran Matić spoke at a press conference about the dirty games of NATO with the stories about Albanian refugees and as well about the media manipulations with those refugees, especially by the US CNN and the Sky News from Britain. One of the drastic examples is the disappearance of the 50,000 refugees from a camp in Macedonia, noting that this disappearance was owed to unpaid honorariums of 50 to 100 Deutschmarks per person, so that all extras simply left. The latest attempt to manipulate the public opinion of the world happened after the bombing of the Chinese embassy in Belgrade. The press conference, called in reaction to the bombing of the Chinese embassy by the Federal Minister Goran Matić, began with his quotation of the statements of Javier Solana that NATO is exclusively aimed at military targets. He spoke about the manipulation of information, that even today this accident is called a simple mistake. And he also spoke about the arsenal of justifications used to satanize the Serbs, already studied in Bosnia, showing the pictures of human suffering. This is a scenario orchestrated by CIA, the US, and various so-called humanitarian organizations. The federal minister then spoke about all of the various statements of NATO that change from day to day. For example, if you take into consideration only one of Clinton's claims that there are 1.5 million civilians missing, then in Kosovo there will be less people than there were in total. He said that our analysts have summarized all of the data from NATO and Pentagon per day, per hour, and so forth and so forth. And we came to a number of 3 million people who have allegedly left Kosovo. I will tell you that Mark Twain, the well-known writer, said one statement, which is very well known. There are lies, there are damned lies, and then there is statistics. I think that most of these numbers we see are between damned lies and statistics. The goal is very clear. NATO troops in Kosovo and occupation of Yugoslavia. That's why they kill everybody who is trying to return to Kosovo, ordinary passers-by, convoys of refugees returning home. They need an empty Kosovo. This afternoon, the NATO alliance continued to target civilian objects and facilities. For example, in Čačak, they killed 4 people. In Čačak, around 3:10 in the afternoon, the aggressors of NATO attacked once again with several missiles the industrial zone in the wider area of the city. The attack was repeated 20 minutes later. 4 people died. One of them was a driver, the other one a co-driver in a truck from Belgrade that was trying to go around Čačak. 2 other people from Čačak died in their own homes. 5 people have been accommodated in the Čačak hospital, 2 of them severely injured. Material damage extraordinary, especially on the Technical Institute, the factory CER, and the construction company Hidrogradnja. Several houses in Braća Stanić Street have been destroyed. An entire settlement, primarily with private homes, has been severely damaged. Many roofs have been damaged and also broken window panes everywhere. In the attack of the criminal alliance that began around 3 p.m. this afternoon, despite anti-aircraft attempts, there were several missiles that hit, for example, the village of Cvetka, close to Kraljevo. There were no human casualties, but there was another missile that hit the neighboring village of Samajli, damaging a church. That holy sites mean nothing to these criminals was shown by the subsequent attacks on the county of Raška near the medieval monastery Stara Pavlica. There were no human casualties, but there is material damage. The criminal alliance continued today to attack the area of Užice and Bajina Bašta. After the attack of the airplanes between 1:30 and 3 p.m., there were 3 explosions. As Tanjuk learns, the area of Kadinjača was under attack. The commanders of the Third Army and the Pristina Corps, General Pavkovic and Major General Lazarevic, visited part of the units of the Pristina Corps who have been successfully defending our country from the NATO aggressors for a month and a half. The commanders of the units on the ground gave their report to the generals about the determination of the fighters and the officers in their defense of the country. They showed to the generals all of the measures undertaken in the area of defense. The commanding officers saw how successfully everything functions in terms of the defense. They especially stressed the cooperation with civil defense units and the Ministry of Internal Affairs. By visiting a large larger number of units, both generals convinced themselves that there is a high morale among our units and that the system of defense continues to be exceptionally stable despite daily attacks. There is a full combat control of the territory and a full functioning of the civilian government and the regime of security. Commanding the officers and the soldiers in their results in the area of defense, the commanders of the Third Army in the Pristina Corps noted that the evil alliance has not reached a single military goal, and that despite the efforts of the international community towards a peaceful solution, NATO aggressors continue their daily and grievous attacks on innocent civilians and civilian facilities. Both generals demanded of the officers and the soldiers to continue maintaining their state of readiness and unity of all these defensive structures. In Podgorica, around 2:45 today, we heard the sirens warning against the air attack. At the same time, there was an explosion from the southern part of town. Shortly after 3 p.m., the missiles hit the bridge Andrejevica-Murino in the northern part of Montenegro. 4 artillerymen, 4 brothers Maric, Milan, Miladi, Milovan and Milorad. They responded to the call of the fatherland as voluntary members of the artillery units. Only Milan is not married, but he says that he will after the war. My father said, this is a time to defend our country. And all 4 of us decided, agreed to come to this artillery unit and defend our country until it frees itself from these NATO aggressors. What did your father tell you? That Kosovo is the spirit of the Montenegrin and the Serbian people, that we have to defend every part of Yugoslavia. Did he wish you good luck? Of course he wished good luck. And also told us not to complain during this fight for the freedom of our country. They're very proud of their ancestors and their families proud of themselves. The Socialist Party of Republika Srpska announced today that in the attack of NATO against Belgrade during the bombing of the Hotel Yugoslavia on the 7th of May, Anđelko Ninčić, one of the members of the presidency of this party, died. He was one of the founding members of this party and champion of peace. The Yugoslavs today bid farewell to their Chinese friends killed during the NATO attack. Sun Yat-sen, spokesman of the special mission of the Chinese government that came to Belgrade today, condemned the brutal attack of NATO led by the USA, stressing that this is a violation of international norms and of Chinese sovereignty. NATO has to take full responsibility for this deliberate attack of the Chinese embassy, said Sun Yat-sen. And the Chinese government has the right to take other measures. At the new cemetery in Belgrade, there was funeral ceremony for the Chinese citizens, casualties of the bombing of the embassy. The last respects for the national agency correspondent Xinhua, the correspondent of the daily Guanmia Zhibao, and his spouse were paid by numerous diplomats, representatives of the federal government, and friends of China. The ambassador of China to Belgrade, Guan Zhangli, spoke about the deceased as people who will be received in China as heroes. The Deputy Foreign Minister Wang Zhuojiang also spoke, as did the Deputy Foreign Minister of Yugoslavia, Zoran Novakovic. On behalf of the government of Serbia spoke the Deputy President Milovan Bojic. Those who have been killing our children for 50 days, our old people, our innocent civilians, shooting at our hospitals, at our maternity wards, universities, destroying our entire infrastructure, not living in peace, even our holy sites, graveyards and cultural heritage as a mad force. They don't know how to stop themselves. And force has one great weakness, because force doesn't know how to determine its own limits. Freedom-loving people of China, just as the people of our republic, know very well that the law of the more powerful one is always the greatest lawlessness. Both of our nations advocate power in the name of justice rather than justice in the name of power. Both countries, China and the Federal Republic of Yugoslavia, know very well that on this planet there will be a lot less evil if evil would not be inflicted in the name of good. And today evil is something that's imposed collectively. It's not accidental, because collective evils, you can never find their culprit. And these collective evil people are doing this in the name of the so-called New World Order. Even this mad deed shows the substance of this New World Order. That is to say, evil as an aspect of professional duty, murder as a form of social converse, lies as a daily component of life. Those who have generated the crisis throughout the world, those who have orchestrated the humanitarian catastrophe, they try to localize through their fast policy this crisis through their so-called peace forces that are rather occupying forces. They orchestrated the humanitarian catastrophe of the refugees in Albania, in Kosovo. And today, because of these refugees, they have caused a humanitarian catastrophe of 11 million Yugoslavs. And this is why world history will never forgive this. And this is why this is a defeat before the world history. The concept of unipolar world that rests on mad force needs to be stopped as soon as possible. Today, Kosovo, tomorrow, Tibet, and who knows what else, and who knows how much more. That's why may there be eternal glory and thanks for the tragically killed Chinese diplomats. They're victims of a principled stance of the National Republic of China regarding the Kosovo crisis and a breach of the friendship between our people. We shall forever remember these people, and the friendship between our countries and nations will be even stronger.
Tomorrow morning at 9 Eastern, we'll bring you the latest NATO briefing.